Hi, welcome to The Inner Way. I'm your host, Father David Smith. We're going to continue today our study of unseen warfare, one of the great works of Orthodox spirituality. We were looking at chapter 29 last week, and chapter 29 really sets up the next 5 chapters of the book. It introduces the subject of what is it that the devil does to trip us up in our spiritual lives. So we looked at the way that chapter 29 introduced chapter 30 and introduced chapter 31. This week we're going to get into chapter 32. I thought that we would kind of finish it out, but really when I started to read chapter 32, there's just too much good stuff there to hurry through, and we have time, so why not do that? So we're looking at chapter 32 today. Now, chapter 29 was saying that, to go back to chapter 29, there are people who, having been freed from the shackles of sin and having acquired virtues, again fall into sin with still greater moral corruption. In their self-delusion, some of these latter think that, in spite of it all, they are still advancing toward perfection. So this is a difficult chapter. Last week we were looking at people who really have no concern for the spiritual life at all, and anything that God says to them, or I might say to them, or you might say to them, is really meaningless. Then there are people who have intentions of growing in their spiritual life, but never actually do anything about it. This week, when we come to chapter 32, we're talking about people who have decided to follow the spiritual life, who have made some kind of progress in the spiritual life, not only plans but actions, and what happens when the devil takes notice of them. The title of chapter 32 is On the Wiles of the Enemy Against Those Who Have Entered the Right Path. And I'll begin right at the beginning of the chapter. But suppose a man has overcome the first 2 obstacles, is filled with desire to be free of the bondage of sin, and has begun to work for it without delay. Even here, the enemy does not leave him alone. Now, this is a subject I will talk about occasionally because I have encountered it in my own life and I have seen it in the lives of others. When we begin to get serious about our spiritual lives, we become more obvious to the devil. We begin to have attacks of the devil that we have never had before. I was sitting next to a man one time, and we had a program for people who were coming back into the faith. And there was a meal, and I was sitting next to this guy at a meal, and he said to me, I thought that when I came back to the church that things would begin to go better for me, and they're not. They're going worse. I have heard that many, many times. That's a hard thing, but we understand why it happens. I almost think of that game where little woodchucks come up through the thing, and you have to hammer them with a hammer, and it's like a thing you play at the state fair. This is exactly what happens. We pop up out of the hole, and the devil is standing there with a mallet and wants to bop us back down into that hole. We try to figure out what he's doing to attack us so that we can prevent that from happening. Okay. The book talks at this point about those attacks that we are under, and I want to spend some time with this because I think it's an important part of growing in our spiritual life. So, unseen warfare is talking about arrows. Arrows are coming at us from every direction. When we rise up from our former selves, when we rise higher in our spiritual lives, the arrows begin to fly. And this is what it says: arrows from above are suggestions for excessive spiritual works above his powers. Arrows from below are suggestions to reduce or even completely abandon such works through self-pity, negligence, and heedlessness. Arrows from the right are when, in connection with some right undertaking and works, the enemies lead a man into temptation and the danger of downfall. Arrows from the left are when the enemies present concrete temptations and draw a man towards sin. Arrows from the front are when the enemies tempt and disturb a man by thoughts of what is to come. Arrows from the rear are when they tempt him with memories of past deeds and events, and so on. So you can see that the author of Unseen Warfare is saying you're going to get attacked, and it is going to be in specific areas. Attacks, arrows coming at you from above are like when you want to do more than you should and attribute your success to yourself. Arrows from below are simply telling you to give up. Arrows from the right are when you're doing good things and somehow it goes wrong, either in yourself with pride or in some other way. Arrows from the left are when you're tempted to do things you shouldn't do. Arrows from the front, what's going to happen in the future? And arrows from behind, what did I do in the past to deserve all of this? So it's really a shocking image to think of yourself. You're out on a battlefield. You're no longer surrounded by the other soldiers because you're not behaving like everybody else. You're going out on your own. You're rising above. And to think that the enemy is surrounding you even from below, above and below, and shooting arrows at you, you know that it is going to be a very difficult battle. Now, this goes on to talk about methods, specific methods that the devil is going to use to attack us. So those arrows are coming from those sides of us and so on, but what are they? What is their power? How is it that they are going to wound us? And it has 3 methods, and I'll read about the first one right now. After a man has decided to abandon his wrong ways and actually does abandon them, the first task of the enemy is to clear a space for an unhampered field of action against him. He succeeds in this by suggesting to a man who has entered the right path that he should act on his own and not go for advice and guidance to the teachers of the righteous life who are always attached to the church. So this is another thing I've run into before, where I will actually talk to someone who has decided to improve their spiritual life, who has decided to embark upon the spiritual life and grow in his or her faith, and yet stays away from the church. This is wrong. It is as if you are going to say, I want to get my degree in something, but I'm not going to go to school. I'm going to just sit and study on my own and read books on my own. It's not the way it works. Maybe for a few people it does, but for the normal person, this is not going to work, and it's not going to result in anything. We need spiritual guides. I have a spiritual father. I have people that I go to for spiritual advice. We all need that. And where does it happen? It happens in the church. This is the school that you go to learn in order to grow toward, in my illustration, your degree. The second method, I'm not going to read the beginning of this paragraph that talks about the second method, but I'll start a little bit down further here. But the enemy hastens his coming to this idea by concealing himself. And the idea is that you're going to grow in your spiritual life without any help from the church. Concealing himself and refraining from attacking the novice, who, feeling thus free and unhampered, begins to imagine that this good state is the fruit of his own effort, and so rests on them, and while reciting his prayers about help from above, mutters them through his teeth merely as a meaningless formula. Help is not sought and does not come, so the novice is left to his own devices and powers, and such a man is an easy prey to the enemy. In this case, it's talking about monasteries, so it uses the word novice, but really it's not a bad word. You know, when we're away from the church for a long time and we come back, we are like novices. And so the ones who decide that they are going to do it on their own without any help will very often, the unseen warfare says, the devil withdraws from them for a time because he wants them to feel good about their decision and to feel good about themselves, so that when they grow in the spiritual life, they attribute all of that to themselves. And they don't need a spiritual guide. They don't need to read spiritual books. They don't need to go to church. And that's where, slowly but surely, the devil, by backing up a little bit, then is able to attack with some success. I think this is the last of the methods. I'll read from another paragraph. Another result of self-delusion and of ascribing one's successes to oneself is to assume the right to give oneself special dispensations and indulgences. So this is the kind of the next step. that when you remove yourself from the help of the church, you also make yourself the decision maker in how you are going to conduct your spiritual life. So the attacks that happen to us, those arrows flying at us, they're unrelenting. It's not like they make a volley of arrows and then say, well, I guess we didn't achieve anything, we're going to go bother somebody else or something. The demons are not like that. They're going to keep going and going and going. I think this is the chapter that talks about, us going to bed and rising up, and the devils have been awake the whole time. They don't sleep. And so the attacks keep coming and coming and coming. And when we feel like we've done pretty well for ourselves, then we will say we deserve a little break. And this happens all the time with people, especially in terms of fasting. People will fast according to their own schedule. They fast for a little while and they say, I don't really like this. I don't think it helps me spiritually, so I'm not going to fast anymore. That's deciding for ourselves what is good and what is bad. And then again, we become an easy prey for the devil. Now, just in summary of this chapter, what a spiritually beneficial chapter it is. It ends like this. So you can see for yourself how important it is for you to do everything with advice, never to ascribe any successes, however small, to yourself, to your own powers and to your own zeal, to avoid all excesses and indulgences, and to lead a life which, though even is energetic and alive, always following the order and rule once established by the example of the saints who lived before you, and by the good judgment of experienced men who are your contemporaries. So that talked a little bit about a subject that I kind of skipped over a little bit, and that is sometimes when people come back into the faith, they pile upon themselves excessive disciplines that they have decided to follow. And usually they follow those for a short period of time and then become very disillusioned. That's another part of it. I hope you can read this chapter yourself. It's beautiful, chapter 32. Next week we're going on to chapter 33, which is another aspect of the chapter 29 back there that we were looking at. And we will hopefully conclude soon with these difficult parts of the book talking about the attacks of the devil. I hope you can join us for next week's program. And until then, God bless you, and I'll see you in church.